Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Doyle, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to what is the last episode of season 3, and I am taking us back to my roots, English wine. So my question to you guys, if we take out Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, how many grape varieties can you name that are growing, well, successfully or unsuccessfully in England? Well, today we are analysing the stats that have just recently been released by WineGB. And when I say we, I have a very special guest for you. I have my head winemaker, Fergus Elias, who is filled with opinions as much as he is talent. And so he's going to be giving us his thoughts on what's growing well, maybe not so well. We will be talking about one of our very special white wines, part of the Winemakers collection. It's called Cinque Ports 2019, made up with 5 grape varieties, and it just won gold at the WineGB Awards 2023. And the whole reason for the Winemakers collection is that when you realise down at Balfour Winery, it is all about clone selection. Just on Hush Heath Estate, which is our home, there are 60 acres of vines planted and 136 different combinations of clones and rootstocks. So yes, when Ferg says he's obsessed by clones, he genuinely really is. And these individual rows, which can be completely different to the next row along, will get picked separately. And everything comes into the winery, very small batch, very boutique-y. And this allows the winemakers to be able to isolate those very, very best grapes that in specific years show something extra special. And that is where they, Fergus and Owen Elias, so father and son winemaking team, can really play around, experiment, have fun with new winemaking techniques using the very, very best grapes. And something exciting gets released each year. That is what attracted me personally to Balfour Winery. So I love these episodes with Fergus. If you haven't heard our episode before, go back to episode 106 and start there and then finish here. So grab yourself a bottle of Balfour, perhaps the Nanette's Rosé 2022, just featured in the Sunday Times as one of the 6 English rosés worth the money. Or perhaps our Luke's Pinot Noir, because as many of you already know, Balfour does Pinot Noir right. So pour that glass and enjoy the episode. Ferg, you are in the hotspot. You are in the official question chair. I asked my Instagram audience yesterday to ask me questions they wanted you to answer about English wine. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, that's it. So it's not too bad. So question
6 lunatics.
Actually 5. One person asked 2 questions, but I'm going to give it to them because there was only 6 questions in total. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean...
So, question number 1.
Yeah.
What are, in your opinion, the most popular red grape varieties that we can, and I love this, safely grow after Pinot Noir? Because that one's the obvious one. So, do you want to elaborate? Yeah, no, you can't mention Pinot Noir because that one is a tick.
The most popular, there isn't a great deal. After Pinot Noir, there's Pinot Meunier. There's quite a lot of that kicking around. That represents a big chunk of WineGB's planting.
And you like Pinot Meunier, right?
I love Pinot Meunier.
Why?
Because it makes really interesting wines. I love it in still wines because you get that sort of Parma violet-y, quite interesting, sort of dusty, delicious flavour profile. I like it in sparkling wines because you get a really interesting fruit profile. I think that's what drives a sort of, you get a slightly more orange, tangerine peel-esque thing. And I think that's Meunier, and that's that. Yeah, so Meunier is great. Rondo don't bother with, it's revolting.
No, don't tell the Northerners that, because they plant a lot of Rondo.
yeah, I know, but it's...
Okay, why? Why
doesn't
don't...
really just...
explain yourself, because someone, who's listening from America or Canada, for instance, are going to go, Rondo, well, what is Rondo and why don't you like it?
Okay, so Rondo is frankly a loathsome variety. It was very big in England for a long time. It's a super sort of dark-skinned hybrid grape variety. So it's a cross from the 40s, it's Czechoslovakian, and it's weird. I think it's Severa and Laurent. I can't remember, though. It's not even
worth knowing.
Yeah, it came out of Geisenheim. I'm trying to think of something nice about it. It ripens early. It's got thick skins, so that's good. So it doesn't get downy mildew. Okay, I've been hard enough on it. Why do people grow it? People grow it because it ripens easily.
Yes.
You get phenomenal color extraction from it. So it's a Tintero variety. So it gives you red juice. So you press it, you've got red wine. You don't need to do any skin contact. You don't need to do anything like that. If you want to make a sparkling white base wine turn pink, you add about 1 to 1.5% Rondo, and there you are. It'll be a brilliant, vivid, slightly purple pink. The wines that I think is the only place you can really use it, and you need it in tiny percentages, i.e. for colouring up blends. As a single varietal still red, I think that it's a little dull.
I'll be honest, I'm trying to be nice, but I agree. I haven't found any Rondo that's not clumsy. That's how I feel is the best way. It's fruity, it has some body, but it's a bit clumsy.
Yeah, for me, it's not the future for English quality wine.
Okay, so I think we just put far too much attention on Rondo.
Yeah, no, we were supposed to be talking about popular varieties. So Regent, I think there's a real gap in the market for Regent. We use it to make still wine. We use it to make a rosé. Because again, a bit like Rondo,
do we?
Yeah, we do. Funnily enough, it's a weird cross. So Regent is actually a cross of Silvaner and Müller-Thurgau.
How did it turn red?
I have no idea. I think there's a third one in there, but I don't remember the name of it. It was quite a long time ago. Again, it's one of these sort of. I don't think it's actually Geisenheim. I think it actually came later.
I think it is a German hybrid.
Yeah. It's from Rheinhessen, and they still grow it in Rheinhessen, I think, but not in any particular quantity. I don't think anyone really grows much of it. I've heard about it in Belgium. Again, it's good because it ripens early. It's good because it's better than Rondo because it's got a slightly more interesting acid profile. It can make quite interesting still rosés because you can press it and the juice is quite pink. Like I put Regent through on a sort of champagne cycle and I'll get quite pink juice from it. I won't need to do any assemblage on that. It's good enough, and that's a lot of that's down to its skins. Again, quite thick, which gives it great resistance to fungal diseases. So downy mildew, again, prime example. So yeah, it's fine, and I think you can make some nicer wines with that, and I think it's more interesting than others. Sometimes used to make red. I don't think it makes very good red. But so Regent's probably the third safe variety. If we're talking unsafe, Gamay. Gamay. I think Gamay has a real future. You just have to taste the wines coming out of Biddenden. They've got that fantastic Gamay Noir, which no one's quite sure if it's a rosé or a red, but it doesn't matter because it's really nice. They've been doing that for a long time, and what's quite nice is Gamay goes for sparkling or still. It makes really interesting sort of red fruit dominant sparkling base, which I think is quite cool. So Gamay would be my unsafe bet.
I love that. And actually, looking at the stats, the WineGB stats that have just been released, which we are going to talk about throughout this, there are 4 hectares only of Gamay in the whole of the country.
Yeah, that sounds about right. How many hectares of Rondo are there?
They don't mention that. They don't go into that one.
Yeah, that's because there's
it's
even
not
less of
interesting.
that.
Oh, dear me. I think that sums up the reds at least. And I think you've talked the fact that we've got quite a bit of hybrids planted, and you've touched on downy mildew. You know, we are a marginal climate. So that actually leads me into the next question, where somebody asked, what is the advantage or disadvantage of being a winemaker in England? What do you think to that?
The advantage is, there are so many. I've got a ludicrously good job. I love what I do because it is every year we're breaking new ground, we're doing new things, we're trialing new varieties, we're working on different styles. You know, every year we're getting better at growing, we're finding better sites, and those sites are obviously coming online. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty exciting place to be making wine. And there's no real rule book, which is lovely. We have a lot of freedom in what we do. I get to make wine where I come from, I was.
That's lovely. That's romantic and poetic.
I know. And Mum and Dad are, 40 minutes down the road, which is nice. They're far enough away that I don't have to see them too often. Although I see Dad almost every day anyway.
Well, I mean, he did have a helping hand in probably who and where you are.
He did a bit, didn't he?
Yeah, and everyone, if you don't know who Fergus's dad is, go back to the episode before the part 1 that we recorded. I will link it into the show notes, and you'll learn all about Owen Elias and why Fergus Elias has had a slight advantage to why he's an amazing winemaker. Slight advantage.
Slight. I mean, I got here on hard work and dedication.
That is true. That's why I said slight. Okay, so disadvantage.
It's still quite a marginal climate. Climate change is making life easier. It would be churlish of me to try and pretend that climate change is making my life harder, because it's not. Average temperatures are going up. Grapes get riper. That's all true. But it isn't all fun and games. Climate change has meant that our winters are wetter and not as cold. And the fact that they're not as cold means the vines don't go fully dormant as quickly as they should. Ideally, you'd have a really cold, hard snap straight after harvest, and the vines go, cool, I've shut down now. And they don't, because it stays at 12 degrees and it just rains. And the rain is another angle. You know, we're mid-July now, almost. It's cloudy and has been for the best part of a week. You know, that's not great. Frost windows have grown, so you used to get to the end of April, early May, and you'd be like, cool, frost is, it happens, but it's rare. As a rule, frost windows used to close at the end of April, so it was great. So yeah, disadvantage is the climate. It's still marginal. We don't consistently get years where we hit the super high numbers that I, as a winemaker, would love. But that's okay. That's why I'm a winemaker.
You know what? Less alcohol, we can drink more English wine, which I think is fabulous. Now, you'll like the next question, which leads on to the whole, this is a bit of a fussy climate. You do have to work a little bit harder to make delicious juice here. So if you weren't a winemaker in Kent, in England, where would you be? Which region of the world would you move to?
You see, it's quite interesting because I've probably answered that 3 or 4 different times over the last 5 years with 3 or 4 different answers. I think I'd like to be in Tasmania working with Pinot Noir. I think that's what I'd want to be doing.
So you're a cool climate winemaker.
I'd still be cool climate. Yeah, and I think I'd want to work with Pinot and Chardonnay. Obviously, any winemaker who works in a cooler climate wants to do Burgundy, although calling that cool climate now is beginning to get a bit silly. Burgundy would be amazing, but I don't think I'd want to work there for long term. I would have liked to have done 2 or 3 vintages there in my sort of formative years, but sadly the opportunity never arose, and then I got this job, and this job is definitely better than Burgundy.
Yes, and it's perfect because it is cool climate, and as you said, it's where you grew up. So now, touching on the fact that you said there aren't really any rules, I did get asked, is there a tiering system or a Grand Cru system in UK anywhere? Now, obviously, we've already touched on that there isn't really many rules, but I mean, there are kind of discussions on Grand Cru systems. We obviously do have PGIs and PDOs. So what are your thoughts to that question?
Interesting. I think it's too soon to really... I don't think at the moment we've identified Grand Cru sites. I think there are a few that we're pretty sure will be. You look at Chapel Downs, Kitts Coty, and you go, okay, yeah, that's quite good. You look at most of the Crouch Valley, you go, yeah, that's quite nice. That's quite interesting. You look at one of our sites, we've got a really good one over near Cobham, and you go, okay, yeah, that's interesting. But they don't have decades upon decades of performance. The first crop didn't come off Kit's Coty till 2011. It's only in its 12th season commercially. It's too soon to really be nailing down Grand Cru sites and classifications in my eyes. There are PDOs. What's quite interesting, and it's the one that gets forgotten, there's actually a PDO called the Darnibol PDO.
What?
Yeah. So this is a Bacchus-only PDO, and it comes from a specific site at Camel Valley. It's probably their only Cornish fruit, and it's this Bacchus vineyard that has been looked after by Bob Lindo's wife, whose name I completely forgotten. But
Mrs.
she's
Lindo.
literally, Mrs. Lindo has literally pruned this vineyard every year for 25 years. And they always make a single site expression of Bacchus from it every year. And that has a PDO. And that's what a PDO is all about. That is history, it's typicity, it's terroir, it's all of the things that a PDO should be. Unlike, of course, Sussex, which isn't a PDO. It's a political area.
Well, interesting, because that was also another question. Somebody asked, you can't ask an English winemaker questions without saying, what do you think about the Sussex PDO? And I already know what you think about that. You've touched it's political. It's just literally the boundary of Sussex. So it's not based on terroir.
Yeah, I couldn't identify a Sussex wine versus a Kent wine. It's too vague.
Could this help winemaking in England in any way, with other areas creating their own PDOs with slight more restrictions on? Because this PDO from Sussex does have restrictions on what yields can be when you press the juice. There is a few bits and bobs in there that they need to take into account.
There are some technical things, but those technical parameters, I don't know them well enough to comment too carefully on.
There's not that many. I looked
specifically on them. Yeah, so I do remember reading through it. I appreciate what they're doing, but I think that they've jumped the gun. It's too soon. And actually, who's to say that that is the style that Sussex is going to be most famous for, and is typical of Sussex? And frankly, I don't think there is. If someone came to me and said, what is a typical Sussex wine? It probably would be a still wine. It would probably be something like, you look at the wines coming out of Nutbourne, their Sussex Reserve, which ironically doesn't fall into the Sussex PDO because of the varieties they use. That wine has 30 years of heritage. That it doesn't get much more Sussex than Sussex Reserve in my eyes. That's what I think of when I think of a Sussex still. And then you think of the Sussex Sparklings, and then you go, well, it's the same thing. I don't think of Night Timber. I don't actually think of Rathvinny. I don't really think of Ridgeview. Maybe, they've been around for a while, but if you wanted a typical Sussex sparkling wine, again, you're looking at the slightly weirder varieties, the slightly funkier ones, the sort of Huxel Reavers and the Reichenstein, and that makes a really nice sparkling.
Okay, interesting.
But I think that, there's a broader PDO for England, which subscribes what varieties you can use and things like that, and that's quite a good PDO at the moment. I think it works quite well. There are areas that it could be strengthened, and there's discussion over what that looks like at the moment. It's quite an entertaining thing to watch from the sidelines. But if you're going more specific than just England, I really think that it needs to be for a reason, and that reason can't just be a commercial or political one. That's my view.
Okay, interesting. Now, I want to go back to Bacchus when you said that there is a PDO of Bacchus. So you were actually talking to me about considering Bacchus is England's white grape variety. Hardly any of it grows anywhere else.
I think you'll find Chardonnays are white grape variety.
Well, okay, sorry. This is the one that is unique. Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, the stats say 31% of all grape varieties grown in England are Chardonnay. So yes, our number one planted grape, and definitely a leading grape. But sorry, the one that is more unique to us, I should say. And you were telling me that there was just a very basic, boring formula for making Bacchus that all winemakers tended to do, and I found that fascinating and also quite geeky for anybody. Like, can you share with everybody what that was and how you think Bacchus is evolving now from your perspective?
So Bacchus actually represents, about 8% of our total plantings in the UK?
Yes, it does.
Right?
It does, because I have written that down. Yeah.
It's an interesting varietal. Yeah, it's famously very aromatic. It's very saleable because it tastes of something. It's very easily defined. When you pour it for someone, you can talk about elderflower, you can talk about nettles, you can talk about things that they can actually taste, and it's easy. And it used to be, there was a bit of a formula for English Bacchus. So the fruit would come in, it would be crushed and destemmed, it would go into the press, they'd press it on a still wine cycle. It would then be settled or floated, whichever proclivity you tend to prefer. And then it would be fermented using probably one of or a combination of 3 yeasts. So QA23, VL3, X5, all quite sort of aromatic Sauvignon Blanc yeasts, fermented quite cool, bottled in March, no oak, under screw cap, banged out at, in the early days it was probably about £4 or £5 a bottle. Nowadays, obviously, a lot English wine costs a lot more than that. That was Bacchus. That was what it was. It cost, even at the start of my career, which really wasn't that long ago, a decade ago, I saw Bacchus being sold at between £600 and £800 a tonne. Nowadays, it's £2,000 a tonne. That's what it costs to buy it.
How would that compare to buying Chardonnay, and just for people to have some perspective?
Probably about, it depends. Chardonnay can go all the way up to, I've seen people pay £3,000 for Chardonnay.
Wow.
Usually the par price for high quality Chardonnay is somewhere between £250 and £2,500.
Mm-hmm.
So £2,000 is toppy for Bacchus, but it's in a similar price band. As a result, funnily enough, the price of a bottle of Bacchus has gone up significantly. Mm-hmm. But I suppose you could argue that this rise in price has led to, you've got to offer value for money. And this is always the problem with English wine. It is expensive. It is hard to make. So if you're doing it, you have to offer your consumer and your customer value for money. And so as a result, people have been more experimental in recent years. So you're seeing different yeasts, different fermentation techniques, barrels, foudre.
Yeah, you're describing you. Well, minus the foudres.
It's been very exciting.
Can you bring it back to English, please?
I've been in Germany, haven't
I? Okay, yeah.
But I think that's what's exciting now is, and I'm not in a club of one. Everyone is doing
Playing
more
around
with Bacchus. It's got more to it now than it did maybe 20 years ago.
Well, you've been literally taking Bacchus, I think 2021 was 9 different yeast strains.
Yep.
Some of it wasn't even Saccharomyces cerevisiae. You were just...
Nope.
Yeah. I know at one point you were using wild yeast, but I think no more wild yeast. Not happy with them.
Yeah,
They're too wild.
No, it's not even that. I think with winemaking, I can understand why people would do wild ferment, and I can see the perks of it. I understand, but actually, why not incorporate a bit of control and go, okay, well, I don't know what that's going to taste like. It might not work. That's quite a big risk to take, especially if it's not yours. If I make a wine and go, well, I'm not sure if it's going to be very good, and turn around to my boss and say that, I'm not sure he'll be overly impressed. That's the bit you've got to remember is actually there's a big element of risk with wild. I also think it doesn't necessarily, just because it's wild doesn't make it better. Mm. And that's something that's often missed. It's that, well, I've done this to it, so therefore it's a better wine. It's like, no, you've done this to it and it doesn't taste as good as it could have done. And so I prefer with my Bacchus, I use a lot of yeasts, a lot of different strains, co-inoculations, individual ferments of different yeasts, and then blend that back together, because that's, for me, is how you build in texture and flavour and layers of these different wines,
and different temperatures. You've been doing different temperatures this year as well, specifically.
I like different fermentation temperatures, and that's how you do it. That's much more interesting than just sticking it in a tank and then forgetting about it for 6 weeks.
Yeah,
I know I'm denigrating wild fermentation a little bit there, but
you allowed your own opinion.
it is effectively what happens. Obviously, if it doesn't work, then hopefully you would act to rectify this, whether that's using some actual yeast or some nutrition or warming your tank up or something like that. I'm sure any good winemaker would do that, but why not just start with a yeast that you think might be interesting and go that way?
Why not? Well, okay, you've talked about the way you like to blend and different yeast strains and temperatures. So I think that takes us on to, let's talk about one of Balfour's wines, one of your Winemakers collection wines. And this is actually your specific wine. It's the Cinque Ports 2019, which won gold this year at WineGB Awards. So we're very happy, aren't we? Yay!
I'm
Bravo.
delirious.
Yeah, you sound it. Anyway,
No, I'm kidding. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, of course you are. Well, I have come prepared. I poured myself a glass of, yeah, of course. And I have the 2019. There's obviously you made 4,000 bottles of this. So thankfully, we still have some of this around. The last episode we recorded together, we were talking about the gold that we won for last year's WineGB Awards. And that was on the Gatehouse Pinot Noir, which sadly has sold out. There is no more of that. That was the 2020. But this is 2019. Now, can you talk about that? Because last year, you released 3 wines, 2 of them. The Gatehouse Pinot Noir was 2020. The Rosé, the Mary Rose Rosé, was 2020. And then this one, the Cinque Ports, which is a blend of white grapes, everyone, so we'll get to it, 2019. So that was really something where you just were, that was about being patient, wasn't it?
It was. It was. And even when we released it, it still had more to go. As is evidenced by its performance at WineGB. WineGB 2022, that was last year. Blimey, sorry. It got a silver, and I was a little disappointed. I thought it was probably worth the gold, but it got a silver, and this year, 2023, it picked up its gold that it deserves, which is fascinating. It's rare for us to make a wine in this style. So Cinque Ports is a blend of the 5 white varieties of Champagne. So you've got Chardonnay, which makes up the vast majority, but you've
90%,
also got,
according to the tech sheet.
Yeah, well, wouldn't always trust those. You've got Pinot Blanc, Petit Meslier, Arban, and Pinot Gris, the 5 white varieties of Champagne. We fermented this. I actually used a really interesting yeast strain for this. So it's a mix of 200 individual strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, all in one packet.
Okay. Wow, okay.
So it's like wild ferment, only it's packet yeast, so it's safe.
Okay, quite interesting. So why? Just because, people are going, okay, 200 different yeast strains in one, and
the idea with it, the problem that you'll often find, I'm going to have to bash wild yeast again. All right, okay. This is the last time I'm mean about it. The problem that you'll often find with wild ferments and things like that is eventually one yeast strain is going to become dominant over the others. And if the winery you're working in has ever worked with any commercial yeast strains, specifically any of the sort of Champenoise ones, so something like 18207, that yeast is still in the air, it's still in your kit, it's still there. And so a lot of wild ferments, actually, what happens is at the very start, you might get sort of 7 or 8 competing strains all trying to ferment.
All running the race. All running the race.
But then there'll be one killer strain, one super
Usain Bolt,
steroid-riddled, like massive unit that will just outcompete and kill all the other yeast strains. Almost
actually kills, So not quite it's not quite like running.
It's a bit more Hunger Gamesy.
Yes.
Inevitably, if you were to do the analysis on a wild ferment, if you ran a DNA sequence on the sort of yeast strain that is dominant, it'll probably turn out to be 18207 in the UK, because that's the most ubiquitous yeast in the country.
Interesting.
So wild is never truly wild, but can be if you have an entirely sterile environment. You could do it then, but it's worth noting. So working on that principle, by using 200 individual yeast strains, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get all of those yeast strains to start fermenting. So you get this really interesting phase right at the start where you've got all these different yeast strains competing with each other. ultimately one of them will be
The winner.
dominant. Yeah, the winner. All races must have a winner. It's the same with yeast. But what you're hoping for is that in that first third of fermentation, that first sort of 3 to 5 days, that you'll have enough different strains going fermenting, offering different things, so aromatic compounds or amino acids, or lots of different things going on, giving you different flavors and unlocking different parts of the wine, so that when one does finally take over, that they leave behind enough of a footprint that the wine itself has developed something slightly more interesting. That's the idea.
Yep.
And so it's all about, winemaking is all about layers and layers and layers. That was the idea behind the strain. I've not massively embraced it. I still use it, but not in vast quantities. It's not one of those yeasts that I've gone, that's really interesting, I'm going to bring that into the winery full time. I'll always have a bit of it kicking around just to try on something new. But yeah, it's not something I necessarily reach for regularly, but quite interesting. So it was fermented with that, and then it was left in tank till the spring. So fermented in stainless steel, quite cool ferment, then barreled down. So half of it went into barrel, all Fontainebleau. So we go to the forest at Balfour. So you can have French and American oak, and that's great, but you can be more specific than that, and you can go to the forest that you like. So I like Fontainebleau.
Why?
Dad likes. I think that the wines come out with more texture and elegance. And I think that Allier, which is Dad's favourite, is a little too... you get more of the sort of coconutty
American
notes with it. I think it's a bit brasher. Which is fine. I like that. I can work with that, especially on Pinot Noir. I think that's actually quite interesting. But for white, Fontainebleau for that sort of elegant, refined oak, which I think is really interesting. You can go even further than that, because actually, if you really go for it, within the forest, there's a huge variation, and even within a tree, there's quite big variation in oak. So you can really go to the nth degree with barrel selection. But I frankly don't have the time or the resources. I just know that as a rule, I prefer Fontainebleau to Allier, and sometimes there are barrels that are exceptions to that rule.
Yeah.
It then spent 9 months in oak and the other half in stainless, then got recombined in stainless and left for a further 9 months, and then got bottled, then left in the bottle for a year before we released it.
And that's a long time waiting, but I think that was the point, wasn't it? You're tasting it and saying, actually, no, not ready yet. No, this is a wine that seems to it's going to have a long history. It's slow to get going, and now it's just singing. So it's an interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea with it. Is it wasn't 99% of the wines that we make here get released within sort of 12 months. It's still wines I'm talking about, get released within 12 months of the harvest. And that's normal. That's fairly standard across the UK. We're a young industry. No one's really built up massive stocks. There are very few people who can hold significant quantities of their still wines back. I mean, we can't. I managed to hold 4,000 bottles back out of 3 years. That's 4,000 bottles out of over 1 million. That's the reality. It's a good commercial reality because we're selling what we're making, and that's fantastic. But it's a truism that English wine doesn't get the time it needs. Well, not necessarily it needs, because it tastes good. So, who's right here? But it's rare that English wine gets given time. And I felt with this wine, I was able to hide it and maneuver it around the winery. It was always in a weird tank, so no one could ever find it.
That's the way to do it.
I was petrified that someone would spot it and be like, why don't you blend this away? And I'm like, well, it tastes quite nice.
I'm glad they didn't. So I have a question. There's literally 1% Arban in there. There is 4%. Yep. Again, this is trusting the tech sheet. So
it's fairly reliable.
We have 200 vines in total of Petit Meslier and Arban. So 4% Petit Meslier apparently went in here. Now, I asked you and Owen to describe to me these two varieties that nobody ever tastes. We're the only people in the UK growing these great varieties. Hardly anyone in Champagne has them in their vineyards. Any new vineyards are not even allowed to plant them because they're so low yielding, but you did it anyway. Last time I, because you do, because you can. No, so the last time I asked you, you were like, I remember, I don't know if it was your dad or it was you, and you went, it tastes like strawberries. I think that was your dad, and then you just went, yeah, yeah. And that was literally your response, because I suppose you press it together and typically do ferments together because there's so little of it.
Yeah, what's really hard, so Arban's just bloody weird. It's sort of like... What's really interesting is with these wines, we've had 3 of them now that we've released that have really small percentages of these really strange varieties in. So you've had Lacey's, Septidile and Cinque Ports. Their impact is huge considering how small a percentage they represent. Mm-hmm. Arban in France and in Champagne can be quite sort of buttery and soft, with a weird sort of citrus note. It's rare. I've tasted one Arban in my life, pure Arban. It's incredibly hard to find, but it's sort of, you get citrus and you get a bit of vanilla, and it's sort of a bit like that. But Petit Meslier is fascinating. Petit Meslier is a bit greener.
Oh, okay.
And so it's aromatic, and that's what makes it really fascinating, is it gives wines this really aromatic twist. And the reason no one bloody grows them is because they crop hilariously lowly, especially in the UK, where obviously the climate's not quite as good as Champagne. Mm-hmm. And obviously in Champagne it costs, what, €1 million a hectare? I mean, that number's 5 years old now, so it's probably even more. But, if you bought a hectare of Champagne, you are looking at spending a hell of a lot of money.
So plant something with some yields.
Yeah, you want to get something that's actually going to give you a return on investment, because Arban and Petit Mes aren't the varieties for that. Whereas here in the UK, I mean, don't get me wrong, land's not cheap here, but it's a lot cheaper than that. So we can afford to plant weird things like Petit Mes because we've got the space.
Because we can. Actually, interesting. Yeah. So WineGB stats have said the average yields in the UK are 4.8 tonnes per hectare. So how does that compare to our yields in general? How does that compare to Petit Meslier? I'm really asking you now. Petit Meslier and Arban. And then how does that compare to yields in Champagne? Oof,
okay.
That's a lot.
So if we start with how does Petit Mes and Arban do? So 4.8 tonnes per hectare, coincidentally, is exactly 2 tonnes per acre, which is the number that WineGB have been pumping out as the average yield in an English vineyard for about 20 years.
When people were rubbish and had no idea how to actually...
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's arcane as a number. It's an old rule of thumb that I don't think is actually reflected. And if it is, it's because you've got some seriously low cropping outliers that are dragging everyone else's average down. Okay. If you're east of Brighton, you should be looking at somewhere in the region. Do you want this in hectares or do you want this in acres?
Well, the fact that I've now just said 4.8 tonnes per hectare, are we able to stick with hectares?
Yeah. Okay, so I'd say a fair yield is probably closer to 6 tonnes per hectare.
Okay.
Potentially a little bit more. We, as a rule, would expect somewhere in the region of 6.5 to 7 tonnes per hectare for Champagne varieties. That's still hilariously low compared with Champagne, where it's 12 tonnes per hectare. So there you go, nearly double.
Okay, interesting. Wow, okay.
And then Arban and Petit Meslier in the UK, I don't know the stats for Champagne, but in the UK, I get about 1.8 tonnes per acre, so 1.8 times 2.4 gives me, it's like not very much. 4.3.
Okay. Okay,
and
that's super interesting.
That feels generous.
Okay.
It's probably close to 3.5.
Do you know what I would like to say is generous? This wine that I have.
Is it?
Let me just say, yeah, it's really lovely. Do you know, when was the last time that you actually drank Cinque Ports?
When did I last? I had a bottle probably 2 weeks ago. We had my sister came down from London and we shared a bottle. Well, we shared quite a lot of bottles, but that was one of the earlier ones, so that's a relief because I could still remember it. It's in a really good place at the moment.
What I really like about this wine is that I think there are sometimes wines that when you open them up and you pour them in the glass, over that time, like for instance, when you're having dinner and the wine gets far more air but also warms up, you really get this different evolution and it changes, and then the floral notes will become more present or certain spices will come. And this is what I get with this wine, which I really appreciate. So you get far more of a wine drinking experience, not just a nice wine. But it's really interesting because I think now compared to last year as well, it's got even slightly more, it's gone more citrusy and savoury on the palate slightly. There was more of a kind of, there was more of a bright, not sweetness in sugar level, but a sweetness of fruit. But it's actually really interesting now. And I think that what I love, the nose is actually quite rich. You smell it and I'm getting this kind of like apple crumble vibe. Like, obviously, because it's got...
that rolled oats has been one of my more recent tasting notes on it. That sort of rolled oat flavour.
Yeah, and even if you throw in a little bit of honey in there as well, but like it's... obviously it really does have that the toastiness coming from the oak, but at the same time the fruit really plays center stage, and it's like this fleshy peach going on the nose, and you have this kind of, you still have lots of perfume, lots of lovely white flowers, but the palate then is really crunchy. It's still got this lovely, it's really limey, but then this kind of just nice layer of like a brioche and like the peach note in there. But I really like how it's gone more savory, but it's really mouth watering. It cuts through. It's so fresh, yet has all those kind of different layers of different fruit flavors and slight different spices. But it's the perfume on the nose as well that does it for me. It's lovely.
Amen, brother. No, love that wine. It's great wine.
Well, what I want, everyone, it's only £40. Go grab it. Go to Balfour Winery website.
I'd say it's very reasonably priced.
Actually, it's totally reasonably priced. No, for English standards. It is for the fact that it's this good, that it's spent this amount of time in oak. What you've done with it, the fact that now it's had even more time in bottle, it's evolved, it quite clearly is going to last for a good 5 years more, whatever, because it seems to just be, still really super, super strong. It tells such an interesting story. Everyone, go get it. There's a few 100 bottles probably left, so we'll see. But talking about grape varieties, right? So we have the Petit Meslier in our band, which is cool. But I was looking on, because I just want people to, the stats that people can see, it's quite interesting. There's some I want your thoughts on what the hell is growing in the UK. Now, of course, these may just be individual plantings. There is Cabernet Franc being grown in North Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire.
And someone's planted it in Wales this year as well.
I love Cabernet Franc. Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. Do you think that we would have any chance down in the south?
I've seen it recently on a recommended list for someone who was being really poorly advised actually on what to plant in their vineyard. Do I see it? Cabernet Franc, it probably would work in the south of England. I worry that it won't work as well as people want it to.
Okay. Well, let's be hopeful.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's the varieties box office enough either.
Well, you have doubts about that. Cabernet Sauvignon has now been planted in Herefordshire and Devon.
Yeah, cool. No, I'm not going to...
I think we need to move on. They can't be planting that to grow naturally. They must be doing that with tunnels or...
I don't know. Never underestimate the insanity of people.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I sincerely hope no one's trying to grow it outside of a tunnel. And frankly, I don't want it if it's growing in a tunnel. I'm being really mean. I'm not a mean person.
No, you're not normally. Anyway, what can we do? It's coming out of your mouth. I can't edit that.
No,
my editing skills only go so far. Chenin Blanc is being grown. I'm excited about that. Chenin Blanc is being grown in Kent, and then if I can even pronounce the Welsh region, Carmarthenshire. Anyway.
Carmarthenshire.
Okay, but I like that. Chenin Blanc in Kent.
Yeah, no, that might work.
Could.
I don't know who's growing it. I'm slightly envious that I didn't think to grow it before them. So
okay, well, that's always next year. Okay. Merlot in, again, another Welsh region, so I'm not going to pronounce it. East Sussex and Cornwall.
What are they smoking in Wales?
Meh.
Yeah, okay. Not yet. Too
Yeah.
soon. Also, too far west.
Uh-huh.
I'd come east.
Albarino
Oh, that's an interesting variety. I
in
wonder if
Kent.
anyone's had the vision to plant some in Kent. That would be really interesting.
We're not allowed to
Um,
talk about that. So
no,
moving on.
Jack.
Watch this.
Jack will be most unimpressed.
No, Jack's going to listen to this. Watch this space, everyone. Moving on. Riesling in
Yeah,
Suffolk.
is that the only place that it appears on the
That
WineGB?
Well, interestingly, it does. So, from what you're saying, it
Interesting.
suggests that perhaps it should also say Kent.
I couldn't possibly comment. Actually, I'm allowed to talk about that one. We planted some Riesling.
Woohoo!
One of our best sites. It's a few years away, so it only went into the ground this year, so you've got a bit of a wait on. But yeah, I think there's some potential there. Dad really thinks there's potential, so I'm just
Yeah.
allowing him to go ahead.
If we stop having cloudy days and get enough sunshine.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It needs that UV.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. I'm
Okay.
not sitting on the fence. I'm obviously pro Riesling, but I feel it's going to be interesting to see how it develops.
Okay. I'm glad that we can admit that we have that. Gewürztraminer in East Sussex.
That's okay. Yeah, no, that could be fun. Is anyone
Yeah.
growing any Grüne Veltliner?
It hasn't been mentioned in the stats, so if
That's a
they
shame.
have, it could be just one vineyard. Okay, you think that has a hope here?
No,
be.
no, but I'd like to try it.
Okay, all right. Everyone watch your space. There's now 17 hectares of Sauvignon Blanc in the UK, so that is growing.
The Sauvignon Blanc will work.
Yeah.
In
Okay.
in the right regions, that variety will do well. I've seen it grown quite well in Essex, and I know that it works in Kent. Not that we've got any in Kent, but yeah, Sauvignon Blanc will grow, will ripen. Yeah, maybe we can replace all the backers for that. That'd be nice.
Stop it. You're being mean again. So anyway, moving on from that before you get mean, because you can't be mean about this. They've also announced now that we have 943 vineyards in the UK, 209.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. It is really
That number's
amazing.
probably grown as well. That's probably outdated. We might even have crossed the 1,000 mark by now.
Well, we probably have because, first of all, okay, so let me read this out and then you can make some comments. So 943 vineyards, 209 wineries. At the moment in total, if we include Wales and apparently the 1.9 hectare planted in Scotland, that's hilarious. There is a total...
That's Lorna Hall. She was on my MSc course.
Oh, crazy people. Love it.
Yeah, no, she's pretty mad.
Good for Lorna. She's included in this. So her 1.9 hectares totals 3,938 hectares in total. And apparently with that, because we didn't quite hit the 4,000 hectares mark yet, but 600 hectares have been planted that aren't being commercially used yet. Therefore, they're not included. And apparently 400 hectares were planted this year already, which is 1.75 million vines.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on. So let's just say 4,000 hectares. I mean, that's basically an eighth of what is planted in Champagne, isn't it? It's still tiny.
There's still a long way to go. Although, what's the size of Burgundy?
Oh, I don't know.
That's not huge. Why do you not know this?
I can't know. I use things that I use for, like, off the top of my head.
I think you'll find that Burgundy is around 25,000 hectares.
Well, can you Google it?
It is 25,000 hectares. So that's quite interesting. You know, we're a fifth of Burgundy.
Okay.
Nearly.
All right. That's good. That is cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. And then I suppose for context as well. So we have 170 acres, don't we, planted, Balfour, across Kent, a little bit in Essex.
yeah,
I
something
think
like
170, more or less. So that works out as just under 70 hectares. So we contribute at the moment 70 hectares to the 4,000. Bless us.
70 divided by 4,000. What is that number? That's a toughie.
Are you doing it? Are you working it out?
I'm trying to. It's about, I don't know, 1.7%, something like that.
How is that
2%.
possible? But it's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so literally you're saying contributing to 1%. That's shocking. But we, making around 500,000 bottles now, and we'll be making with more of our plantings. We need to plant some more, presumably. We're going to get we're hoping 1 million in 5 years. Might be a bit ambitious.
No, I think you'd be
No,
surprised.
you don't think that's ambitious? Okay.
I would be surprised if we missed it.
All right.
Well, no, actually, Han, that puts us 2029. It's probably more like 2032 that we'll hit the million mark, but that's still not that far away.
Well, now when you say 2032, WineGB have predicted that the UK will be producing between 25 and 29 million bottles a year.
Well, we'll be 1/25th or 29th of that number. So we'll be about 4%.
I love that. That's absolutely brilliant. Oh, dearie me.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's great. I love that we're doing it. I think it's really exciting and working with the varieties that we've got and building a brand around it. I think it's a lot of fun.
And you're still obsessed by your clones, aren't you? Your clone research, your clone, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're drinking, you didn't say, you're not drinking Cinque Ports with me, but you're drinking Chardonnay Clone 76.
I am. I actually think that I like this. So years ago, I made a wine called Sepsidile, which was the first wine that I ever got my name on. And it's a wine I'm absurdly proud of and I loved. And it was a really nice wine. I've struggled since then. It's not that tricky second album because I love all the wines I make. I think objectively, I have made better wines than that wine. However, I've not loved a wine as much as that since I made it until now. I think I've got something really special. So we've got some Chardonnay 76, which is a really interesting clone, grown on chalk out near Cobham, so a really good site.
I've tasted this, I'm assuming. Racy and electric were my tasting notes for that clone.
We've chucked a bit of oak in there as well, so it's probably nearly a fifth of it has oak.
Okay.
So really, it's fascinating. It's textured. It's got that wonderful sort of limey precision, which I love in Chardonnay, and I'm really happy with it. Single clone, single vineyard, single everything.
Oh, wow. And this is going to be, because it's preview everyone then, because I don't even know about this. Is this going to be released this year as one of the Winemakers collection wines?
No, I'm putting it in bottle in August, hopefully. And then you probably won't see it till spring, summer at the earliest next year.
All right. Okay.
There's no point rushing this sort of thing.
Well, we don't need to rush this sort of thing. As you and I both know, as we conclude this episode, there are certain wines or certain things that we are not allowed to talk about. But they will be things that we can talk about and drink and share with you lovely people very soon. There are lots of things. So it's one of those things, isn't it? Come down to the vineyard. There's always some wine that's new or a Winemakers collection wine that's just been released or one of the old Winemakers collection wine that we still have a few lying around. So, yeah. Should we advise everyone to come down to the vineyard so they can taste whatever the hell's going on?
I guess that's probably the thing that we should do, isn't it?
Okay. There's no enthusiasm coming from your side.
Oh, yeah, but I don't work in sales. I'm not a brand ambassador.
I am not sales. That's one prong. The other prong is marketing. The other prong is education.
Education.
Not politics, that's for sure. Oh, dear. Ferg, thank you. Thank you very much for just going through a few of your comments, even if they were very hateful, some of them. No.
Oh, no. But...
They weren't. It's too late. It's too late. We can't go back now. No.
I like Pinot Gris. That's a nice variety.
Yeah. We haven't even talked about Pinot Gris. Pinot Gris... I don't know what percentage of Pinot Gris is grown, but it's actually on the list of the main grapes. It's the last one on the list. Yeah, okay.
That's exciting.
To conclude, everyone, I want to just so everyone knows, right, you've got Chardonnay first, Pinot Noir, then Pinot Meunier, Bacchus, which we mentioned was 8%, Seville Blanc, then Solaris, Reichensteiner, Pinot Noir Precoce, Rondo, and then Pinot Gris. And that's when the actual list stops. So things like even Pinot Blanc didn't make it onto that list, so I guess they're even less.
It's nice to see Pinot Noir Precoce broken out of Pinot Noir. I wholeheartedly approve of that.
Well, I don't really like it when you try a Pinot Noir, it says Pinot Noir on the bottle, and then you find out, you're thinking, that's a bit naff. Oh, it's a bit basic. It's a basic bitch. And then you turn the bottle.
Being horrible.
And then you turn around the bottle, the label says 100% Pinot Noir Precoce. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's not the same. It doesn't have the same quality or complexity as Pinot Noir.
And it's actually illegally labelled when they do that. It's not enforced.
Maybe, I was going to say maybe they don't do it anymore because that's...
No, they definitely still do it.
Oh, really? Yeah, sorry, everyone. We're still working on it. We need to get a bit tougher and tighter. Anyway, but good. There you go. It was split out. So the Pinot Noir, actual Pinot Noir, represents 29%.
Yeah, and long may it continue.
Any other comments? Do you have anything hateful, harmful, evil to say?
Only that I'm in awe of all English winemakers for all their hard work.
Namaste.
Did that sound flippant?
Amen. Maybe. I'm going to have to cut you off now before you get out of control. Thanks, Ferg.
Bye.
Speak to you later. So, if you have been getting value out of any of these episodes and enjoying the podcast, please, as I take about a 6-week break, take a few moments to leave a review on the podcast app you're listening to, if it allows it. Of course, Apple Podcast is one of those ways that will help me and my podcast become more discoverable to other people. If you're listening on Spotify, do please leave a rating. And of course, I shall leave you with a quote. William Butler Yeats said, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." And I hope when you are learning about wine and listening to these episodes, the fire inside of you is burning brighter and brighter. So I'm raising my glass of Balfour to you. May your curiosity into the realm of wine be insatiable this summer. Get in touch with me if you want to suggest things for the next season or have questions just in general. You can email me, janina@eatsleepwinerepeat.co.uk, or on Instagram, direct message me at eatsleep_winerepeat. And until September, when I'm back, cheers to you.